efforts to avoid the horrible attrition rate that besets Christianity. Early Christians knew their wisdom literature tradition very well. The Old Testament had its wisdom books, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes. Those are called the wisdom books. And the circulated letters among the churches of Paul, wisdom as a gift of God's Spirit, was held broadly before them. And they were familiar also, if they wanted to get away from the scriptural world, they were familiar with the teachings of Aristotle. Those readers of James' words were familiar with the law of logic that's called the law of the excluded middle. And what the law of the excluded middle says is simple. Aristotle invented it. Students of logic had memorized it for centuries before James took up his pen, and it said A or X, or whatever letter you want it to be. A cannot be both A and B. Mary is Mary. She cannot be both Floyd and Mary. An entity has one thing, and that's it. So what Aristotle and James are saying is something is either good or it's bad. And to the Christian, we need to listen who defines goodness and bad. And the danger of attrition was there, lying just in front of the church. These Christians in James' time were settled into their world. The institutional church had fallen far away from the initial teachings of Christ and from their contacts with faith that were so loved by the earliest Christians. The church needs today, right now, a reminder of its code of morals and its code of values. We need to look and see what the Scripture says. So, that's the value in this passage for those of us reading it today. Attrition is rampant in the church today. We're all aware of the statistics. Look around. Once upon a time, there were 600 people in this sanctuary. No longer. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful religious facility down at the corner of Cooper and Union. It's a drugstore now. Attrition in Christianity. You know, I read about a couple. They took their teenage son on a trip looking at universities as he was a senior in high school. And they went to a large, well-respected university, and since this boy was good in math, he decided he wanted to be an engineer. George, Deborah, wanted to be an engineer. So they made an appointment with the associate dean of engineering at a large, very well-respected school. And after a period of questions and answers between the dean and the student, one of the parents asked the questions, what is the largest major in this university? Listen to the dean's answer. He says, in the fall, we have the highest number of majors, engineering. In the spring, business has the highest number of majors. And he explained that the new, eager, and bright students enter the School of Engineering in the fall, and they have commitment, and they have excitement, and they have promise. And their initial academic work goes really well. But then in the spring term, they are required to take a certain physics course. Those of you who went to Memphis State in the 60s and early 70s, you remember that one English course that separated the wheat from the chaff? It was a killer. Anyway, there was this one course in the engineering department, a physics course, and it was a backbreaker, and only the strong survived. And as the semester would go on, people would drop away from engineering, and by the end of the term, by the time freshmen were no longer freshmen, the engineering major was no longer the largest on the campus. Well, Paul was writing to that fall semester of freshman churches, those who were new and excited and ready to go. James was writing to the spring semester, to Christians who were no longer freshmen in the faith. And his letter was a general epistle, a wake-up call to them. His letter is a general epistle, a wake-up call to us. Eugene Peterson has written a book that is very interesting. It's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And the book speaks very honestly and clearly about the Christian journey. And millions of people all over the world have begun that journey. But as soon as discipleship gets arduous, or prayers are not answered the way we wish for them to be, folks begin to drop out. And the attrition rate grows. And very few of us have the enthusiasm for what Peterson calls the patient acquisition of Christian value. The Christian journey, and each one of us here this morning is on that Christian journey. Starts out like a sprint, but we find ourselves later on in a lonely, silent marathon. What starts out so beautifully, so frequently is never finished. And so it is as we attempt to gain wisdom. We start out beautifully, but often it's the middle of the race that breaks us. We transfer from heavenly wisdom to worldly wisdom. And so frequently we die with our greatest wisdom. That wisdom that can only come from above, it's still inside of us. And we die with that wisdom unused, that wisdom unspent, and that wisdom unrecognized. And yet, at our service, the world looks at us, and the preacher may say, this person was wise in the ways of the world. Well, maybe, just maybe, that's not a compliment. James says that that's not our goal, not to be wise in the ways of the world. James says our goal is to be wise in the ways of God. James wants us to avoid such endings. He wants us to be declared the winner in the battle of the wisdoms. But he wants us to be declared the winner by only one judge. And that is the one whose decision ultimately matters. James wants us to be known as wise, not in the ways of the world, but in the ways of God. The battle goes on. It never ends. So I leave you with this question this morning. The question isn't what's in your wallet. The question is, where do you find your wisdom? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.